Results are shown here. You can see that, as predicted, at the low frequency resonance, the structure has a mass maximum out of plane, whereas at the high frequency resonance, the mass is stationary and the membrane has a maximum. However, at the transmission loss peak, you can see that it's a supposition of the two structures, so that you have both a mass maximum and a membrane maximum here, along with an inflection point, which is indicated at point A. Taking a closer look at this, you can see positive and negative out-of-plane displacements radially across the structure, and averaged over the entire circular structure, you end up with a nearly zero out-of-plane displacement. What this means is that upstream of the structure, on the incident side, where the sound is incident on the structure, you have a near zero displacement, so that the structure behaves as though it's rigid and essentially not being, the waves are reflected back as opposed to being transmitted across the structure. Downstream of the structure, because of this positive and negative displacements, positive and negative pressure waves are generated and cancel each other out so that they are not able to propagate into the far field. This results in an overall high transmission loss when you combine these two methods of sound insulation. Now, negative dynamic mass has been reported by other investigators for this similar kind of locally resonant structure, but we wanted to try to prove it experimentally. And the way that we did that was to turn to classical physics, F equals ma. In order to show that the effective mass of a structure is negative, you have to show that the force and acceleration responses are out of phase with each other. In order to do that, pressure was measured using the impedance tube microphones, and the vibrometer was used to measure the acceleration pointed at the center of the structure where the mass is. The response is shown here, so you can see that the phases are in fact the signals are in fact out of phase with each other. And this results in a positive force, negative acceleration, and negative effective mass response. In order to be able to use these structures in an aerospace application or automotive application, we wanted to construct an array of them. Some of the things that we were trying to do here was to determine what the differences were between a single cell and array of the structures, as well as to hopefully broaden that narrow bandwidth of the transmission loss peak. If you remember back, that peak was really narrow, so it was really only effective over a few frequencies. We started, for experimental purposes, with a 4-cell structure. So a single membrane was stretched over a frame that divided the membrane into 4 different cells, and then that was mounted on an adapter plug so that we were able to use the same round impedance tube that we used before, and masses were attached to the center of each of the membranes. In order to provide a one-to-one comparison, we wanted to create a similar square cell with the same membrane size, properties, and everything. And that was inserted into a similar adapter plug. We used 3 different mass distributions on the structure. The first one was a uniform mass distribution. So in each of the cells, the same mass magnitude was applied. In the second distribution, 2 mass magnitudes were distributed over the 4 cells. And in the third, a different mass magnitude was applied to each cell. The response of the array is shown here in black, and as you can see, you end up with the same single transmission loss peak and mass resonance as seen for the single cell structure. And that indicates that each of the cells operates independently of the ones surrounding it, so they don't mechanically affect each other. However, there are some differences between these 2 peaks, and I'd like to talk about them a little bit. In terms of the magnitude of the transmission loss, this was attributed to the large amount of the incident area that is taken up by the adapter plug that we used. So in the case of the array, about 60% of the area of the tube was taken up by the plug, whereas in the square single cell, about 90% was taken up. And so that added mass from the aluminum plug is going to increase the overall transmission loss. Additionally, you might notice that the frequencies for the transmission loss peak and resonance frequency are shifted a little bit between the array and the single cell. Doing finite element analysis on this four-cell structure, the pressure distribution, you can see that between two cells here, two adjacent cells, the pressure is lower than it is at the edge, where there are no adjacent cells. The result of this is that there's a pressure coupling between adjacent cells, and so that the structure behaves as though it is more rigid than it actually is, and that's going to drive up the peak and resonance frequencies. Looking at the other two configurations that we tested with the distributed mass magnitudes, you can see that for the configuration where there are two masses distributed over the four cells, you see two transmission loss peaks and two resonance frequencies. And for the uneven distribution with different masses in each cell, you get 4 transmission loss peaks and 4 resonance frequencies, leading to the conclusion that a non-uniform mass distribution will result in a multi-peak system. We also performed finite element analysis on the structure using the same software. The same simplifications were made with the addition that we did not include the aluminum plug in the 4-cell structure. The results you can see here, that for configuration 1, you get the same single peak, single resonance response. And for configuration 2, you get the same 2 peak, 2 resonance response. Now the difference in magnitudes of these curves were attributed to the simplifications that were made, including that we did not include damping in the model, and we did not include the aluminum plug. In conclusion, we were able to determine that transmission loss can be increased by up to 47 decibels over the mass law, resulting in improved sound insulation at low frequencies with a small amount of weight addition. We were also able to create finite element analysis, which will accurately predict the relative changes in transmission loss for both a single cell and array of the structure. But ultimately, the simplifications in the model yield error between the two. We were able to determine that the transmission loss peak is due to a mixing of the resonance modes, and that near zero displacement causes minimal sound transmission. We were able to experimentally validate the dynamic mass that has been predicted, or negative dynamic mass, which has been predicted by other researchers. And we were able to determine that a non-uniform mass distribution on an array will result in a multi-peak profile. A little bit of the future work that I'll be doing, we would like to look into stacking arrays in order to achieve both a broadband effect as well as a higher transmission loss magnitude. Additionally, these structures can be used in honeycomb or sandwich structure applications, which will allow them to be used as part of a structural material in aerospace applications. And then finally, we'd like to create large-scale samples, basically more than 4 cells, which can be tested in a diffuse sound field, such as an anechoic chamber. I would like to thank HRL Labs for support of this work, and that is it.